Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our June 2019 Teaching and Learning for Student Success monthly webinar. We are excited. This is our first webinar of the 2019-2020 academic year. Please remember that we will take a break in July, and then we'll start back up in August. So in today's webinar, you're going to hear from myself and Dr. Rafael Castillo. And this webinar is a follow-up on the session that we did on culturally relevant pedagogy in the summer seminar. So we're calling this Cultural Relevance Remixed, Materials, Lessons, and Assignments. And we have done this follow-up webinar for a couple of years now. This will be our third year. And so if you want to see some of the resources that were offered in previous years, you can go to these links. So rebrand.ly/CRT resources. That'll be the webinar from 2 years ago. And rebrand.ly/CRT-Redux, which will be the webinar from last year. And without further ado, I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Rafael Castillo, who is going to be talking about some of the culturally relevant materials he has used in his English classes. Dr. Castillo?
Thank you so much, Lydia. Let me introduce myself. I teach English at Palo Alto College in INRW courses. I've been with Catch the Next since 2012. And I wanted to talk about how some of these books that I use in my classes have been very successful. The students have enjoyed them, have talked about, they still do whenever I meet them. We talk about particular books. And the book I want to talk, two books I want to talk to you today about are Coats Between the World and Me, and the other book by Reina Grande, which is The Distance Between Us. Now, this particular book by Ta-Nehisi Coates is so relevant right now, and this book is just like 4 years old, and it's so relevant right now because of what is happening right now in Congress. Yesterday, Juneteenth, the day before was Juneteenth, and Mr. Coates gave a speech in Congress to talk about reparations, and a lot of the material that this book covers is a letter to his son. So when I introduced the book to class, I was using 4 books, and this is the first one I used. And I decided to break it down by chapters. So I assigned the students, broke it up by chapters, and each student was assigned a chapter. And I told them, I want you to look for strong lines. What are the strong lines for you? And that's one thing that we emphasize at Catch the Next is when they read the material, they can look for lines or words or paragraphs or sentences that resonate with them, that they can see, they can feel something truthful about that. And this particular book, it really resounded with them because a lot of them felt that, especially the first line, these are all lines taken from the students. And this particular book is about a letter to his son, and it's cautioning him to be careful that he's not aware that in American culture, the black body can be viewed as dangerous. And he tells his son, you have to understand that the world is not what you think it is. And we talk as students, we talk about that. How do you feel about going into other neighborhoods? How do people look at you in other neighborhoods? So we talk about that. Well, let me give you the 3 quotes that we use. And these are the quotes taken from the book. The first one is, the classroom was a jail of other people's interests, while the library was open, unending, and free. So we talked about that. I asked the students, how was your experience in high school? And the majority of the students tell me, well, in high school, sir, it's not like college. Here, we're opening up, we can talk about it. Well, in high school is basically they want to get you out. It's real quick, it's fast. The bells ring, you go to another class, you listen, you take notes, you don't ask questions because it interrupts the flow of knowledge. It's okay. Do you remember anything else about your high school experiences? Well, we read books that were told we had to read. This is supposed to make us smart. Okay, okay. So, so this line, does that resonate with you? And some said yes. To me, classroom was a jail because I was not, I was being fed information that was not really, they didn't interest me. Okay, well, that's why you're in, okay. So why did you decide now to go to college? Well, because I want to learn something different. I want to learn. I want to read. I want to understand, and I want to be a better, productive individual. Okay. So the library was open and underneath and true. We talked about that, and so the students begin to read codes, understand the issues involving in being a young black man in today's society. And we watch a short film. We watch a short film on codes, an interview, and then we break up into small little groups. And by breaking up into those groups, we begin to explore uh, the content of the book. Now, all the students have their own chapters. So when they begin the presentations, this this entire book was used for 1 month. So it took a whole month, 4 weeks, with chapter by chapter. After each chapter, I would have little questions, uh, reading exams, make sure that they're reading, quizzes actually. And then at the very end, they begin their writing process. And the writing process all centers around these strong lines that they selected. I wanted them to select the strong lines. Then I wanted them to tell me why they were strong lines. Then the second one really resonated with students because we had a good discussion about it says, but race is a child of racism, not the father. What does that mean? And one of my students said, sir, I think it means that, that we are born without racism, but we learn it. And we start talking about that. Children, you grow up, what you hear, and then from there we begin to create our worldview. So we talked about that. The students wrote about that, and then they talked about biases. How is that different than racism? So those are fine questions, and we discussed the degrees, degrees of racism, degree. And students always ask us, so, well, what is the difference between prejudice and racism? And we talked about that, and a lot of students, very carefully walked through that, and I asked them, can you tell me something about yourself? What issues do you have? And they opened up. It's one of the things that I wanted to stress in that particular class is for them not to be afraid of their emotions. Because I know we're taught to be rational, to look at things very objectively, but we're human beings, and we do have emotions. And we have to learn to grapple with the emotions and be able to control the emotions, be able to know when it's proper to say a certain thing, when it's not proper to say. The third one we talked about was this last one where I have here. It says, but all our phrasing, the words we use, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience. And usually, right there, students will ask, "Yeah, I like this word visceral. What does it mean? It means gut." And you're right, it is. And you notice how the students tell me, I noticed that he used it in terms of the body. That's correct. He's using it as an analogy. And he said that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. You must never look away from it. And the students then, they begin to ask questions about the body. And I said, well, what do you mean by the body? And usually I have students who say, I think he's using it as a metaphor for all of us, because we all have bodies. And this great body called the United States is in itself a living species. And usually another student chimes in and says, it's like the Constitution. It's a living document. Okay, so how does this fit in with this? About race relations, about racial chasm. And then they start, some students will say, I think this deals with the meaning of the Constitution, but all men are created equal justice, and of course the freedom. Okay. Now, uh, the study guide. So every classroom, every student does a summary presentation. I got 4 students to each chapter, and then they begin presenting the material. They've got PowerPoints. Each PowerPoint has material that they use, and uh, after they finish, the Q&A starts. And usually that takes a good 10 to 15 minutes of talking, raising questions. And by then, the students have already bonded. We can talk about this openly, and then the writing now comes. That's the last part of this is the actual writing. They write a 5-page paper, works cited. And usually, like all students, sometimes I get students who go a little bit more. And they say, I really got carried away. I've got 8 pages. It's fine, it's fine. So the papers themselves, we go through the writing process. We do the writing process. We do teach writing as a process. So they get a chance to read the material aloud to each other. We do grammar checks. We do transitions. What I use in one of the weeks, I ask for volunteers who would like to volunteer the paper so they can project it onto the screen. And usually I have a couple of hands go up. And by using that method, the students get a chance to read someone else's response to these questions, to the questions that I give. And I think I told Lydia to go ahead and pass out some information. I think I've got some handouts on questions. And when they
Yes,
do,
I'm sorry, I wanted to just jump in because I forgot to mention it earlier that if you all look in your control panel on your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section with handouts, and there are 5 handouts in there, and one of them is called, it's a Word document that says Castillo Lesson Between World and Me. So you can look at that, and I'll just go ahead and open that here so you can see. Yeah, these are some of Dr. Castillo's discussion questions
yes, those are the
for this
discussions.
book.
And I use this basically for them to write their papers. And then we do MLA style, the response, and I get a lot of good papers, visceral, really, really gut-oriented papers that really they pour out their emotions. And then we talk about control. How do I control this? Because in writing, you can get a little bit out of control, and I explain to them what an out of control paper looks like. And then I want them to look at this with the thesis, uh, evidence, and then response, then analysis. So we do that. When I get those volunteers, the students, have their paper on the screen and we read and then we ask questions. Then after that, then I give them the exam. I usually have, I'm very big on reading exams. I know some people don't like that, but I do. I like reading exams. So I have all the materials listed, and I try to ask the students, what prompted the housing coach to write this, and he talks about his friend Prince Jones, who passed away. Then he talks about other Trayvon Martin, other characters that have had issues, other individuals who have died because of the body and issues of that. So that's basically what I do in this particular book. It's a very profound book, and I think it's very apropos now because he's got several others, and I think it's a good starting point if you want to read some more of this material on the Hasi codes. The second book. Can we move on to the second one? Okay, yeah. This book is also very apropos right now because of immigration. So these books, they're books that I used before, and this book I used in my INRW course. All right. So the first one is 1301. This is INRW. It's written very easy to read. It's about a young girl coming to the United States looking for her father. Her and her sister paid a coyote. They went through the beast, that train, and they went into El Paso, and then they made it into, and then finally she looks for her dad. And the entire book is such a beautifully written book. It's written very simple. The students, it catches their attention immediately, and it is about her going through this odyssey to find her dad. And when she finds her dad, of course, the family dramas in this particular book. Next slide, please. Uh, is there a next slide on this? Is there a material that I passed out on this video by any chance?
Yes. So I have. So I went ahead and put your group work discussion question there. And again, if you're looking at the handouts, you will see the group work for Reina Grande. Go ahead and open that up. This is a Microsoft Word file that you can download from your handout section.
Well, I've supplied several of them, and this particular book resonated with me because it's about a child, a young Reina Grande was a young child, and she went through a lot writing this book. She's got two novels. She's got another book out, and she's on PBS. She's got this websites about her, and we invited her to class. Cat Clinics invited her. She came to my class, and the students really opened up to her. One of the things that they asked, I would say 80% of the students had this question: did you forgive your father? Did you forgive your parents? And we talked about the role of forgiveness. How is this different from acceptance? As an adult, how do we understand the ambience, the ambivalence we may feel toward our parents if they make mistakes? Is it better to forgive or to accept? How important is it to process these feelings before our parents pass on? Has Reina fully processed her feelings? If so, how can you tell? If not, how can you tell too? So the students asked her, and she was very surprised, and she says, "Yes, I did forgive them. I cannot carry this weight, this guilt with me all along." And it gave the students a chance to write, because a lot of the students, uh, all families have issues, and the student had an opportunity to write about this. And it was a cathartic moment, a very cathartic moment for a lot of them. The book is very easy to read. I had the students selected their strong lines, and from there they read in small groups. Another student selected his strong lines or her strong lines, and then they explained why. So this whole process of reading, active reading, I call it, takes basically 2 or 3 days. They're reading, they're discussing, they're writing, uh, and then they're responding. And a lot of them, I asked them, what sections of the book resonated that you find more appealing? And majority of them said they liked that part when Reina Grande talks to her cousins and they have this big party, and then the next section is when she begins to have a boyfriend, because now she's in the United States, she's become a citizen, and she's learning the language, she's learning languages, and right there they share stories about uh, meeting having different challenges in school. And right here, I tell the students as a child what I went through. Usually, I like to also show and tell. And I told the students that when I was in first grade, second grade, I came home, I was real happy first grade, and I lived with my grandparents, and I told them, guess what? Abuelito, my grandpa, what? I said, I've got a new name. You have a new name? What do you mean you have a new name? I said, my name's no longer Rafael, it's Ralph. And everyone just started laughing. And my grandpa did not think it was funny. So we talked about naming. We talked about what happened to Reina at the very beginning. Reina, what's your name? What does it mean? And the students already know what it means. A lot of them are bilingual. And then we talk about, I asked them to think about, well, their name, what's in their name. And that's when I use, this is INRW, that's when I use the assignment on what's in the name. that's very important. It kind of dovetails into the distance between us. I had a student, a very enterprising student, who said, I like the title, The Difference Between Us, but do you think, sir, she was talking about us, meaning the United States, the difference between the United States? And man, it just clicked, and everyone started like, wow, Marco said that? And he was very happy that he said something profound. And I said, that's a great idea, Marcos. Between us, yes, I think a case can be made that Reina Grande is writing about us, writing about the United States, writing about her experience, her cultural experience. And I got a chance to email Reina Grande about that, and she laughed and she smiled. She says, "I never thought about that, but that that's possible." So these two books have resonated, and they're easy to use because they complement it, and they are basically culturally adapted because they deal with what Lydia and I talk about. All through life, we've always had the window where we look at other cultures, we read other types of experiences. I'm a fond reader of Shakespeare. Yeah, I love reading Shakespeare. That's the window. But now I tell the students now we're going to use the mirror. We can look at ourselves. We can look at ourselves, and I think that's very important. A lot of the students really enjoyed that. There are other two books that I use, but I'm not going to talk about them. Maybe next time we'll talk about Cisneros and another book by Mr. Well, it'll come to me.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Dr. Castillo. And hopefully we'll have time at the end that you can talk about some of the things that you're doing with those other works. I also wanted to show everyone that in your handouts, you also have, excuse me, you also have this annotated bibliography that Dr. Castillo and I updated last year. So it has the full table of contents here, and there are a number, I don't know how many actually, but a large number, over 100 different materials, different sources that you can use, and each entry has been annotated by Dr. Castillo and myself. So it just gives you a brief description of what each work is about, so that if it's one that you're not familiar with, that maybe you can just kind of review to the description and see if it's something that you can use in your class or in your classes. And we've also put next to it in parentheses which courses we think it would, each source would be relevant to. The other piece, let's see, the other document related to the distance between us that you have in your handouts is these discussion questions. And it's broken down by book and chapter. So these are really useful as well. As you know, that we don't have to, as instructors, we can still create culturally relevant classroom spaces without reinventing the wheel. So these are really, really useful as well. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Castillo. And
and I wish I had more time because I wanted to talk about films, how you can use films on these.
absolutely. Well, again, if we have time during Q&A, I hope that you do raise some of those. So I wanted to talk about a couple of assignments that I have been using in my classes for this first one, digital storytelling. I've been using this for a few years now, and I've used this one in rhetoric classes, in composition classes, in I've also done a workshop with 6th to 8th graders, a summer arts workshop where we did digital storytelling, some of my colleagues and myself in Houston. And now, most recently, I use this as a project in English 1302 at Austin Community College, where the curriculum is for English 1302 is focused on narrative analysis and short fiction analysis. So, but this is a great way to actually open up and get students to open up to telling their own stories. So the digital storytelling is a process-oriented way of creating a 3 to 3.5 minute video that tells a story about some aspect of your life. And so you can find more information about it at storycenter.org. I should say, full disclosure, that I did go through a full Story Center workshop when I was at Houston Community College, and so that's kind of where I got the background for this. But I've also now led workshops of my colleagues and things like that. So if you're interested in digital storytelling and it's something that you want to bring to your campus or to your department, we can chat about how we can try to make that happen. So you see here, this is from the from the Story Center website. So these are just a few of the themes that they have. And basically at Story Center, they go honestly all around the world, and especially where populations have experienced trauma, and they lead digital story telling workshops. So I just wanted to kind of give an overview of the process. And when I do it in my classes, I stretch out this process over weeks. Last year when I did it in Comp 2 at ACC, I put it to the end of the semester, like in the last probably 5 weeks or so of the semester, and it was sort of became kind of a capstone project, and we had a big showing of each of the digital stories at the, on the last day of classes and things like that. But it was actually this first step in the process, the story circle, where I realized that when we were in the story circle, which is a safe space where students have about 5 to 8 minutes to share their story ideas, that this incredible bonding occurred in the classroom. And this is after, the students had already been together and in their familias and everything for around like 6 or 7 months by then. And so they had already known each other and, formed their bonds in their familias and things like that, had already taken, all their first semester classes together. But the entire dynamic of the classroom really changed after we had this story circle. So I decided this past year to move it up to the 4th week of the semester. So we actually start the digital storytelling project much earlier, and it becomes more like a semester-long project. So the story circle, as I said, is a space where each participant, so each student, has an opportunity to share the ideas that they're thinking about for their story, and they get feedback from others in the group. There are very clear and pretty strict rules that the space is a space of respect, that it's a space of confidentiality. So everybody agrees that they're not going to go talking about someone else's story outside of class or outside of the story circle space. And there are even particular ways that we give feedback. So for example, instead of saying, I think you should do this, we all practice giving feedback by saying, if it were my story, I would. And so each student usually will give kind of like 2 or 3 ideas. Sometimes they already know right from the beginning what story they want to tell. And then in that case, the feedback is more like, okay, well, how will you have images for this? How will you, do this? How, so asking kind of questions about the actual composition of the story and the telling of it. The next step is once the student decides which story they want to do, then they draft a narrative. So the digital stories are, and if we have time later, I'll show you an example of one from the Story Center website. But basically they use still images, photos, and the photos are all put together with a narrative voiceover and in a video format. And so the first step is to write the voiceover. And I encourage them just to free write at this stage. And then they submit it to me. This is actually one where we don't go through the traditional peer review process that we would go through with essays and things like that. Instead, they submit it directly to me, and I give them feedback about kind of the arc of the story, the audience, consider the audience and things like that. And this is another great way for them to, especially since for ACC, English 1302 is all about narrative. It's a great way for them to get involved in constructing a narrative, so that then they begin to also see how some of those narrative elements play out in a short little video format like this one. So then I review their narratives and provide feedback for revision. Then they revise and resubmit. And once they get the okay from me, then they do an audio recording of their voiceover. And with this, many of them have like a voice memos or like audio recording device on their phones. If they don't, I offer for them to use the voice memos function on my phone. So we find a quiet space and let them do that. And so then at that point, they have the audio file. The next thing that I do is I usually take about half of a class day, or do maybe like a 20-minute introduction or so of video editing processes and software. Like for example, students that have YouTube accounts can edit and do all of the editing for their video in YouTube. And I provide them with like some video tutorials for how to do video editing and things like that. There's also another free video editing platform called WeVideo that they can use, or if they already have some kind of video editing app like iMovie or something like that on any of their devices, then they can use that. It is also worth talking to your IT people and or your learning lab folks at your college to see what software is available on the campus computers as well, and whether it's cloud-based or not, which is huge because these files are really big while you're working on them. So I show them some techniques, like I show them how to import their files, their photos, and their voiceover file. I show them how to expand the duration that an image will be on there, how to edit, how to cut and splice, how to incorporate animation into these still images. And those are the basic things. And then I'll either have a lab, or we'll do kind of like a DIY lab in the classroom, where I'll give them the rest of the class time to kind of play with the different technology and software. So that takes at least one class day just to focus on that. And then from there, outside of class, they begin compiling their still images and their voiceover narration into their video. And it's usually around 2.5 to 3.5 minutes is a good time. And then I didn't put this on here, but the very last step of the process, which is super important, and it's important to disclose this early on, is that we have a huge showcase at the end. So everybody, and it really closes the circle. And so what we started in the story circle really kind of gets fully completed in the showcase. And they all really enjoy seeing like how their little kernels of an idea that they shared in the story circle have been sort of, come to full bloom in their video. And they come up with some really amazing things. I didn't want to include one here because I don't have permission to share them. But again, like I said, if we have time later in the webinar, I can show you one from the Story Center website, or you're welcome to go there and click on stories in the top right corner to view any of the videos. The other reason I wanted to include this is because since this project is it does take up so much time, I think it would be an excellent practice to be able to do it across multiple classes. So I've also had many like history professors, government professors who have also gone through the digital storytelling workshop, and they've incorporated it into their curriculum as well. So it can be used across a variety of disciplines. And I think it would be interesting to think about which parts of the process you could do in, for example, an EDUC 1300 class, which you could do in an English class, or which you could do in the INRW component of a co-requisite, and which you could do in the history or government or something like that. But seeing how you can crosswalk the different components of this assignment. So the next assignment that I wanted to talk about is a creative adaptation assignment. It's one that I have only recently started doing. And it's also one that I use in English 1302. But the idea behind it is basically that it converts students from being a student of literature or a student of history or a student of government to being a writer, a historian. And so it has this self-authorship effect that that I think is really, really important for kind of rethinking the classroom space, and who are the authors and who are the creators in the space, and who are merely the students. You can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes around the word merely. So this one is basically what I have students do, and I bring this up, I'm bringing up this PDF to show you the actual assignment, and this is also available in your handouts for download. But basically what students do for this is they select any short story that we've read over the course of the semester, and they do a creative adaptation of it by either doing a spin-off on the short story. So they have to pick one narrative element that they would change from the short story. So they could change the setting, for example, they could change a character, they could do a backstory for a character that they want to know more about, or they can write a screenplay adaptation of that story. And so those are their options. I've had students do really, really incredible things with this assignment. So for example, one of the texts that we read is a short vignette from Tomás Rivera's Cuando, what is it? I mean, the earth did not devour them. And the short vignette is called Cuando lleguemos, when we arrive. And this particular vignette is about some migrant farm laborers who are in the back of a truck that has broken down on a road in probably like Kansas or something like that. And it's all their voices and their thoughts and what they're thinking, and it describes, and they're all saying, when we arrive, when we get there, I'll do this. And so it kind of expresses their hopes in this really dire situation. So I had several students that wanted to do an adaptation of that story. One of them changed the setting from migrant farm workers in Kansas to, what was it, to the Berlin Wall, or to East Germany during the time of the Berlin Wall. And so he did all this research on, what was going on in East Germany at that time. And so he changed the whole setting, and it's instead of a truckload of farm workers, it's a busload of workers who are going from East Germany to West Germany. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that they come up with. Also have several sci-fi adaptations of that story. There's another story by Lorraine Lopez that we read called The Tatting Man, and it's about a guy, his wife has died, and he sort of begins to assume her identity. And the other main character is his English teacher, and she has all these issues with her abusive boyfriend. And so I had a student who took that story and turned it from, instead of his wife dying accidentally, he had killed her and started assuming her identity. And instead of Regina being the English teacher, she was actually the detective on the case. And so this student started researching all of this like forensic psychology and things like that, and actually ended up writing an incredible short story. The other thing about this assignment is that it's really long. It's one of the longest papers they'll write. And so And they see that and they have no problems with it. So they're writing like 15 to 25 page screenplays, for example, where they're like complaining about writing a 6-page essay at the beginning of the semester, but they get really into it. So some of the benefits to creative adaptation assignments like this, and I want to challenge you to think about how you could do a kind of adaptive project like this in your own course, is that the students, whether they realize it or not, are learning analysis by imitating and adapting the stories. So one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this assignment is because what I saw is students who were literally in my office hours crying because they didn't understand narrative analysis. And they had ACC, they have to take a final exam that's an analysis of a short story. And it's a required departmental final. And so I have students who, at the time that they're about to start this essay or this short story adaptation, they're so nervous, they're so worried, they're like, I don't get it, I just don't understand. Sometimes they're having trouble distinguishing between rhetorical analysis, which they've done in the first semester, and narrative analysis. And then after they do this assignment, they just completely ace the final. And even if they're anxious going into it, the results are incredible. And it's because like it's very abstract to talk about analyzing character development and characterization. But then when you actually have to get into the head of a character to understand how they're going to make decisions and things like that, it becomes much more concrete. It becomes something you can grab onto because you've seen how that process works. So then when they have to go do character analysis or setting analysis or conflict analysis in the final exam, they have experience with it already. So in that way, it also ends up connecting your course outcomes, your student learning outcomes and core objectives to the assets the students already bring, which our students are very creative, they're very innovative, they're very entrepreneurial. And so it allows them to apply those assets that they already have to the course requirements and the outcomes that we're looking for. At the same time, we know that creation is, at the highest levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So while the, course outcomes may ask that they just demonstrate that they can analyze, this allows them to be able to analyze, to adapt, to evaluate, and also to create in a way that carves out a space for self-authorship. So they're really, really proud when they turn these assignments in. And then finally, again, depending on your course, on your subject matter, it really has the effect of empowering students, again, not just to see themselves as a student, a lowly student, but as a historian, as a writer, as a civic leader, as a literary critic, as a psychologist, because they're applying what they've learned to what the career is. And I think that it also allows them to kind of try on different fields in ways that a sort of strict essay or testing kind of framework doesn't necessarily allow for. So those are the 2 assignments that I wanted to talk about this time. And we are now ready to open up to questions. To any Q&A. So again, if you have questions, you can type them in the questions pane, or you can use the hand raise feature on your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll unmute you and you can ask us a question directly. And actually, while we're waiting on people to formulate their questions, I had a couple of questions for you, Dr. Castillo. One was, I noticed that you had said that you actually spend a whole month on Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. How are you, I guess my question I have is, because I always feel like I'm having to fly through material, so it seems like kind of a luxury to be able to spend a whole month on a book. So I'm curious about 2 things. One, what is the student response to that? And 2, how are you able to fit in all of your material for the semester when you're spending so much time on one source.
When I use the Coates book, I have another film assignment that's merged into a film assignment, and the
I
film
see.
is Crash. In the movie
Oh, yeah,
Crash.
that's great.
Yeah, so it kind of fits in. It dovetails in the questions because Crash is about bias. Crash is about race relations. Crash, Crash is about how Hollywood handles it. And you've got a multiplicity of characters there. You've got the Iranian uh, uh, woman that owns a little, the father who owns that little gift shop. The girl goes to buy a gun, and then you've got the two
Mhm.
police officers.
Mhm.
Then you have the two black characters at the very beginning of the film when you talk about Sandra Bullock and her husband.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you've got all these little issues, and they're watching, and we're talking about that. So then we dovetail that into this particular film. That's how we handle it. So they're writing actually two papers in that month.
That's really cool. You know what? Another film you might want to check out. It's on Netflix. I think it might be a Netflix production, but it's called "See You Yesterday." And it's about these two teenagers who are really, really smart and they figure out time travel. And but they are also growing up in the Bronx, and it weaves in this whole thread of police brutality and seeing young men, the impact of seeing young men from a particular community dying and things like that. You may want to check it out because it might be another one that you could tie in.
Uh, for Reina Grande, I've used film. I always use film in my classes. The films I've used are Giant.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've used those films in class, and to great advantage because the students begin to kind of dovetail with the reading. Uh,
Hmm.
remember I think last time I talked about that book, profound book, historical book called Anglos and Mexicans in the Making of Texas. Montejano's book, who's one of our CTN scholar mentors. I've used that book and I've used Giant, and the students are amazed at how everything dovetails. And I've used that
Hmm.
for writing and for visual because students like visual. They like to see things. They want to see how it connects. And
Yeah.
that particular movie, Giant, has the ending scene at Sargent's Cafe, and I've had students uh, who tell me they were very, very taken aback by that.
Hmm.
We talk about that. That's where the visceralness comes in terms of what happens in Sargent's Cafe.
That's right. And we have another question for you, Dr. Castillo. Dr. Chavez, actually, let me see if I can unmute her if she has audio. Dr. Chavez, you're unmuted now. Would you like to ask Dr. Castillo your question?
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, great. Hello. Thank you both for the webinar. Very insightful. Dr. Castillo, I had a question for you and I had a question for Lydia. For you, Dr. Castillo, I am wondering if you could teach uh, the first year class again, the integrated reading and writing. What three books would be the key books that you would concentrate on given the times?
Okay.
Um,
Actually, for INRW, I really would use Rena Grande's book because it's nonfiction and it really resonates with them because it's easy to read, fast read, and it's written at the eighth and ninth grade level. So it's really good reading. And the second book I would use, of course, is what Lydia mentioned, Tomas Rivera's book, Y no se lo tragó la tierra. Easy reading with little time, the vignettes, and these vignettes offer an opportunity. So now you have, I've done male, female, male, and then one more female, which is Sandra Cisneros, the woman hollowing Creek. And these books I would use for INRW because they lend themselves to fast reading, real short, not long, 38-page chapters are real fast, and you can write real quick items from it. You can, the students have a chance to really write. And I think last time I had some examples of some of my INRW students, their writing. They're really, really improved because they're writing a lot. And I do use journals a lot. They have to write, they have to keep journals. And in journal writing allows them to reflect on paper. And I tell them this: you select. I want you to write, like so many pages a day, and you tell me what section you want me to read. It gives them, empowers them to select whatever section they want me to read. And from there, they print it. I hope that answers the question for people.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. I thought some of the new people may appreciate knowing that. Lydia, you talked about the difference in rhetoric versus narrative analysis. Do you have any sources you can recommend to our listeners?
Well, for the rhetoric, for the rhetorical analysis class, I use it's a it's a press paperback. It's called "Thank You for Arguing" by Jay Heinrichs. And I use that because he uses a lot of pop culture references. And so he explains ancient rhetoric, which I love the ancients. And so he explains ancient rhetoric in a really accessible way that students really like. And it also has the added benefit of since it's in a new edition, the first edition is actually almost always available, the whole thing in a PDF online. And so I'm able to kind of pick and choose chapters from it to use for that class.
Who's the
For
author, did you say?
Jay Heinrichs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank You for Arguing is the title of that one. And for narrative analysis, I usually just put together my own materials. So I have a series of video lessons that I've compiled that I sort of, I assign some of them, but now I do more of a hybrid model where I'll introduce like the various narrative elements in class, and then now I just assign the video lessons for extra credit because students weren't watching them. But what I'm moving more towards this year is something along the lines of what Allegra has talked about in the past with sustainable assignments. And so I'm moving more towards having students actually write the descriptions of the narrative elements, or, in their analyses of particular narrative elements from particular stories, they would serve as a sort of little introductory notes for future classes.
Hmm.
So I don't use a particular text for narrative analysis.
Well, great. If you can add any of those resources to the documents that you're sharing, I would appreciate that.
Okay, definitely. The one major resource that I do use for that class is it's called literarydevices.net. And so it just has little entries for particular literary techniques and narrative elements, literary elements, and things like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So we also have a question here from Cesar Diaz. I'm going to see, Cesar, if you have audio. Do you want to test real quick?
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, the question that I had is, I really love the assignments that you have put together here for the classes. And I had a question about the creative adaptation assignment. You were talking about how the creative adaptation assignment, like the things that they come up with, helps them in putting in understanding how to analyze the sets, like the elements of fiction. And like my question was, do you have like a set of guidelines that you give them for them to recognize it within their own writing, as far as like to be able to actually put it, like to understand, like let's say conflict is here, right? This is the type of conflict I have, or my character is a fully developed character that is complex, and here's why. Like, do you have like any like how do you approach that in the introduction of these elements to students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I basically, with the two stories that I mentioned, or the vignette Cuando Lleguemos and the Tatting Man. So those are the two stories that kind of lead us into this last unit. And with those, instead of approaching the discussion for those stories as, like either close reading or an analysis of some element or something like that, because we will have already been we've already been doing that for the 10 weeks or so leading up to this assignment.
Okay,
um,
okay.
so for the discussion for those texts, I ask them basically, and so in their familias, in their small groups, I ask them to come up with, to basically brainstorm any adaptations that they can to, let's say, when we arrive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I tell them, select one of the narrative elements and change it. And then they come up with a bunch of them. I tell them pick their top 3, and then each familia goes and presents on it. And so just by hearing the different ideas that come up in that discussion, they start just really generating all of this electricity. Their
Yeah,
minds
yeah.
go, their minds just go wild with the possibilities. Especially, there will always be some familias that will be really tame, like, oh, I would like to know more about this character, like, I would do a backstory for this character. And then they'll see some groups that are like, oh, let's make them be going to Mars or something like that, and then they'll go, oh, whoa, I didn't know we could go there, and so then just hearing all the different ideas. And so then we do something similar, but on an individual level with the Tatting Man. So I ask them to generate their own ideas and to start writing,
Okay.
to
Okay.
start basically like, brainstorming in writing how they would do it. And so with that one, it's, I feel like with the analytical essays that precede it, really the main time for sort of groupthink and crowdsourcing is in peer review. But with this essay, I shouldn't even call it an essay. With this creative adaptation piece, one unintended effect was that while they would be writing, the other thing I do with this one is I build in I dedicate 2 full class periods to workshopping the stories.
Okay.
So they have 2 full class periods to be actually writing. And what I found is that they would be showing each other their work, and they would be like talking about like, okay, like what are the different ways this scenario could play out, and what would she say here? So they're all like brainstorming collectively.
You're thinking like writers.
That's exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much for your question. And we are actually coming to the end of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and go to some announcements, catch the next announcements. I want to say thank you to all of you who were able to attend our 5th annual Student Transfer Motivational Conference earlier this month. If we did create an alumni workspace wiki there, and so if you would like to refer any of your alumni to that, you can contact Stacy Ibarra at stacy.ibarra@catchthenext.org. We also want to send a particular thank you to San Antonio College for the English PD session that they had earlier this week with Allegra. Also, everyone, please save the date. We have the information for our Fall Ascender seminar. It will take place October 25th through 26th at the Hotel Indigo Riverwalk in San Antonio. So please make plans to attend that. And finally, any college with new faculty who haven't yet been trained, please feel free to contact Allegra Villarreal at allegra.villarreal@catchthenext.org. And I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Castillo for taking the time to share with us some of your wisdom and your experience in teaching culturally relevant materials. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Again, we will not have a webinar in July, so we will see you again in August. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Dr. Chavez.